Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the penultimate chapter of Plato's Republic. We're reading Book 9 today, and next Thursday will be Book 10. And we would have finished our study of Plato's Republic, and we'll be moving on to pastures new, some new philosophical treatises. I think I'll have a 2-week break where I'll read some shorter treatises, and then we'll begin Plato's Laws, because I really want to study that text, because it's Plato's dialogue that I'm least familiar with, and so it's a good place to share it with you here at Book Club. As always, I'm going to review Book 8, preview Book 9, and then get right into the text. And so in Book 8, Plato spoke about the 4 types of imperfect societies: timachy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny, in that order. And then the way the dialogue, or the book, was laid out was that he would speak about timachy and then the timarchic character, oligarchy and the oligarchic character, democracy, the democratic character. And then we ended Book 8 with tyranny, and we begin Book 9 with the tyrannical character. That's where we start Book 9, and then we move on to the different types of characters and their degrees of happiness. And Plato argues that the more good you are, the better you are, and obviously the worse you are, the less happy. And then the just man and the philosopher is the happiest, or pleasantest is the term that the Penguin Classic uses. The philosopher's pleasures are better or truer than normal people's pleasures, and then the tyrant is the unhappiness, and he's way more unhappy than the philosopher king. So all that's coming up in this stream. As always, to support me here at Book Club, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share the show with your like-minded philosophical friends if you have any. And there's many ways that you can support, and you can find them in the description if you care to do so. But for now, we will be reading The Republic, Book 9. The tyrannical character, its essential similarity to the criminal type. It remains, I said, to consider the tyrannical man himself, how he evolves from a democrat, what he is like when he is coming to being, and whether he is wretched or blessedly happy. Yes, he said, he is the one who is still missing. And do you know what else I think is still missing? What? I don't think we have adequately distinguished the kinds and numbers of our desires, and, if that subject isn't adequately dealt with, our entire investigation will be less clear. Well, isn't now as fine a time as any to discuss the matter? It certainly is. Consider then what I want to know about our desires. It's this. Some of our unnecessary pleasures and desires seem to me to be lawless. They are probably present in everyone, but they are held in check by the laws and by the better desires in alliance with reason. In a few people they have been eliminated entirely, or only a few weak ones remain, while in others they are stronger and more numerous. What desires do you mean? Those that are awakened in sleep, when the rest of the soul, the rational, gentle and ruling part, slumbers. Then the beastly and savage part, full of food and drink, casts off sleep and seeks to find a way to gratify itself. You know that there is nothing it won't dare to do at such a time, free of all control by shame or reason. It doesn't shrink from trying to have sex with a mother, as it supposes, or with anyone else at all, whether man, god, or beast. It will commit any foul murder, and there is no food it refuses to eat. In a word, it omits no act of folly or shamelessness. That's completely true. On the other hand, I suppose that someone who is healthy and moderate with himself goes to sleep only after having done the following. First, he rouses his rational part and feasts on fine arguments and speculations. Second, he neither starves nor feasts his appetites, so that they will slumber and not disturb his best part with either their pleasure or their pain, but they'll leave it alone, pure and by itself, to get on with its investigations, to yearn after and perceive something, it knows not what, whether it is past, present, or future. Third, he soothes his spirited part in the same way, for example, by not falling asleep with his spirit still aroused after an outburst of anger. And when he has quieted these two parts and roused the third, in which reason resides, and so takes his rest, you know that it is then that he grasps the truth, and that the visions that appear in his dreams are least lawless. Entirely so. However, we've been carried away from what we wanted to establish, which is this. Our dreams make it clear that there is a dangerous, wild, and lawless form of desire in everyone, even in those of us who seem to be entirely moderate or measured. See whether you think I'm talking sense, and whether or not you agree with me. I do agree. Recall then what we said a democratic man is like. He was produced by being brought up from youth by a thrifty father who valued only those desires that make money and who despised the unnecessary ones that aim at frivolity and display. Isn't that right? Yes. And by associating with more sophisticated men who are full of the latter desires, he starts to indulge in every kind of insolence and to adopt their form of behavior because of his hatred of his father's thrift. But because he has a better nature than his corruptors, he is pulled in both directions and settles down in the middle between his father's way of life and theirs. And, enjoying each in moderation as he supposes, he leads a life that is neither slavish nor lawless, and from having been oligarchic he becomes democratic. That was and is our opinion about this type of man. Suppose now that this man has in turn become older, and that he has a son who is brought up in his father's ethos. All right? And further, suppose that the same things that happened to his father now happen to him. First, he is led to all the kinds of lawlessness that those who are leading him call freedom. Then his father and the rest of the household come to the aid of the middle desires, while the others help the other ones. Then, when those clever enchanters and tyrant makers have no hope of keeping hold of the young man in any other way, they contrive to plant in him a powerful erotic love, like a great winged drone, to be the leader of those idle desires that spend whatever is at hand. Or do you think that erotic love is anything other than an enormous drone in such people? I don't think that it could be anything else. And when the other desires, filled with incense, myrrh, wreaths, wine, and the other pleasures found in their company, buzz around the drone, nurturing it and making it grow as large as possible, they plant the sting of longing in it. Then this leader of the soul adopts madness as its bodyguard and becomes frenzied. If it finds any beliefs or desires in the man that are thought to be good, or that still have some shame, it destroys them and throws them out, until it's purged him of moderation and filled him with imported madness. You've perfectly described the evolution of a tyrannical man. Is this the reason that erotic love has been called a tyrant? It looks that way. Then doesn't a drunken man have something of a tyrannical mind? Yes, he has. And a man who is mad and deranged attempts to rule not just human beings but gods as well, and expects that he will be able to succeed? He certainly does. Then a man becomes tyrannical in the precise sense of the term, when either his nature or his way of life, or both of them together, make him drunk, filled with erotic desire, and mad. Absolutely. This, then, it seems, is how a tyrannical man comes to be. But that way This, then, it seems, is how a tyrannical man comes to be. But what way does he live? No doubt you're going to tell me, just as posers of riddles usually do. I am. I think that someone in whom the tyrant of erotic love dwells, and in whom it directs everything next, goes in for feasts, revelries, luxuries, girlfriends, and all that sort of thing. Necessarily. And don't many terrible desires grow up day and night beside the tyrannical one, needing many things to satisfy them? Indeed they do. Hence, any income someone like that has is soon spent. Of course. Then borrowing follows, and expenditure of capital. What else? And when everything is gone, won't the violent crowd of desires that has nested within him inevitably shout in protest? and driven by the stings of the other desires, and especially by erotic love itself, which leads all of them as its bodyguard, won't he become frenzied and look to see who possesses anything that he could take by either deceit or force? He certainly will. Consequently, he must acquire wealth from every source or live in great pain and suffering. He must. And just as the pleasures that are late comers outdo the older ones and steal away their satisfactions, won't the man himself think that he deserves to outdo his father and mother, even though he is younger than they are, to take and spend his father's wealth when he spent his own share? Of course. And if they won't give it to him, won't he first try to steal it from them by deceitful means? Certainly. And if that doesn't work, wouldn't he seize it by force? I suppose so. And if the old man and woman put up a fight, would he be careful to refrain from acting like a tyrant? It's not I'm not very optimistic about their fate if they do. But, good God, Adamantus, do you think he'd sacrifice his long-loved and irreplaceable mother for a recently acquired girlfriend whom he can do without? Or that, for the sake of a new-found and replaceable boyfriend in the bloom of youth, he'd strike his aged and irreplaceable father, his oldest friend? Or that he'd make his parents the slaves of these others, if he brought them under the same roof? Yes, indeed he would. It seems to be a very great blessing to produce a tyrannical son. It certainly does. What about when the possessions of his father and mother give out? With that great swarm of pleasures inside him, won't he first try to break into someone's house or snatch someone's coat late at night? Then won't he try to loot a temple? And in all this, the old traditional opinions that he had held from childhood about what is fine or shameful, opinions that are accounted just, are overcome by the opinions newly released from slavery that are now the bodyguard of erotic love and hold sway along with it. When he himself was subject to the laws and his father and had a democratic constitution within him, these opinions used only to be freed in sleep. Now, however, under the tyranny of erotic love, he has permanently become, while awake, what he used to become occasionally while asleep, and he won't hold back from any terrible murder or from any kind of food or act. But rather, erotic love lives like a tyrant within him, in complete anarchy and lawlessness as his sole ruler, and drives him as if he were a city to dare anything that will provide sustenance for itself and the unruly mob around it. Some of whose members have come in from the outside as a result of his keeping bad company, while others have come from within, freed and let loose by his own bad habits. Isn't this the life that a tyrannical man leads? It is indeed. Now, if there are only a few such men in a city, and the rest of the people are moderate, this mob will leave the city in order to act as a bodyguard to some other tyrant, or to serve as mercenaries if there happens to be a war going on somewhere. But if they chance to live in a time of peace and quiet, they'll remain in the city and bring about lots of little evils. What sort of evils do you mean? They steal, break into houses, snatch purses, steal clothes, rob temples, and sell people into slavery. Sometimes, if they are good speakers, they become sycophants and bear false witness and accept bribes. These evils are small, provided that there happen to be only a few such people. Yes, for small things are small by comparison to big ones, and when it comes to producing wickedness and misery in a city, all these evils together don't, as the saying goes, come within a mile of the rule of a tyrant. But when such people become numerous and conscious of their numbers, it is they, aided by the foolishness of the people, who create a tyrant, and he, more than any of them, has in his soul the greatest and strongest tyrant of all. Naturally, for he'd be the most tyrannical. That's if the city happens to yield willingly, But if it resists him, then, just as he once chastised his mother and father, he'll now chastise his fatherland if he can, by bringing in new friends and making his fatherland and his dear old motherland, as the Cretans call it, their slaves, and keeping them that way, for this is surely the end at which such a man's desires are directed. It most certainly is. Now, in private life, before a tyrannical man attains power, isn't he this sort of person, one who associates primarily with flatterers who are ready to obey him in everything? Or if he himself happens to need anything from other people, isn't he willing to fawn on them and make every gesture of friendship, as if he were dealing with his own family? But once he gets what he wants, don't they become strangers again? Yes, they certainly do. So someone with a tyrannical nature lives his whole life without being friends with anyone, always a master to one man or a slave to another, and never getting a taste of either freedom or true friendship. That's right. Wouldn't it be right to call someone like that untrustworthy? Of course. And isn't he as unjust as anyone can be, if indeed what we earlier agreed about justice was right? And it certainly was right. Then let's sum up the worst type of man. His waking life is like the nightmare we described earlier. That's right. And he evolves from someone by nature most tyrannical who achieves sole rule. And the longer he remains tyrant, the more like the nightmare he becomes. That's inevitable, said Glaucon, taking over the argument. And so that was the first part, and now we're going to move on to the types of character and their different degrees of happiness. And as always, if you're enjoying the study of Plato's Republic, please be sure to share the stream or the link to this stream on your social medias. The types of character and their degrees of happiness. Having sketched the 4 types of imperfect society and the 4 corresponding types of character, Plato proceeds to rank them in order of happiness, and in particular to contrast the perfectly just man, the philosopher-ruler, with the completely unjust man, the tyrant, thereby answering the original question asked by Glaucon and Adeimantus. On the evidence provided by the descriptions given, it is shown that they rank in happiness in the order they were discussed, with the tyrant the most unhappy. Well then, I said, isn't the man who is clearly most vicious also clearly most wretched? And isn't the one who for the longest time is most of all a tyrant most wretched for the longest time? If that is to say, truth rather than majority opinion, If, that is to say, truth rather than majority opinion is to settle these questions. That much is certain at any rate. And isn't a tyrannical man like a city ruled by a tyrant, a democratic man like a city ruled by a democracy, and similarly with the others? Of course. And won't the relations between the cities with respect to virtue and happiness be the same as those between the men? Certainly. Then how does the city ruled by a tyrant compare to the city ruled by the kings that we described first? They are total opposites. One is the best and the other the worst. I won't ask you which is which, since it's obvious. But is your judgment the same with regard to their happiness and wretchedness? And let's not be dazzled by looking at one man, a tyrant, or at the few who surround him, but since it is essential to go into the city and study the whole of it, let's not give our opinion till we've gone down and looked into every corner. That's right, for it's clear to everyone that there is no city more wretched than one ruled by a tyrant, and none more happy than one ruled by kings. Would I be right, then, to make the same challenge about the individuals, assuming first that the person who is fit to judge them is someone who in thought can go down into a person's character and examine it thoroughly, someone who doesn't judge from outside the way a child does, who is dazzled by the facade that the tyrants adopt for the outside world to see, but is able to see right through that sort of thing? And second, that he's someone, since we'd all listen to him if he were, who is competent to judge, because he has lived in the same house with the tyrant and witnessed his behavior and home and his treatment of each member of his household when he is stripped of his theatrical facade, and has also seen how he behaves when in danger from the people. Shouldn't we ask the person who has seen all that to tell us how the tyrant compares to the others in happiness and wretchedness? That's also right. Then do you want us to pretend that we are among those who can give such a judgment, and that we have already met tyrannical people, so that we'll have someone to answer our questions? I certainly do. Come then, and look at it this way for me. Bearing in mind the resemblance between the city and the man, look at each in turn and describe its condition. What kinds of things do you want me to describe? First, speaking of the city, would you say that a tyrannical city is free or enslaved? It is as enslaved as it is possible to be. Yet you see in it people who are masters and free. I do see a few like that, but the whole city, so to speak, and the most decent part of it, are wretched, dishonoured slaves. Then, if a man and city are alike, mustn't the same structure be in him too? And mustn't his soul be full of slavery and unfreedom, with the most decent parts enslaved, and with a small part, the maddest and most vicious, as their master? It must. What will you say about such a soul then? Is it free or slave? Slave, of course. And isn't the enslaved and tyrannical city least likely to do what it wants? Certainly. Then a tyrannical soul, I'm talking about the whole soul, will also be least likely to do what it wants, and, forcibly driven by the stings of a dronish gadfly, will be full of disorder and regret. How could it be anything else? Is a tyrannically ruled city rich or poor? Poor. Then a tyrannical soul too must always be poor and unsatisfiable? That's right. What about fear? Aren't a tyrannical city and man full of it? Absolutely. And do you think that you'll find more wailing, groaning, lamenting, and grieving in any other city? Certainly not. Then are such things more common in anyone besides the tyrannical man who is maddened by his desires and erotic loves? How could they be? It is in view of all these things, I suppose, and others like them, that you judge this to be the most wretched of cities. And wasn't I right? Of course you were. But what do you say about a tyrannical man when you look at these same things? He's by far the most wretched of all of them. There you're no longer right. How is that? I don't think that this man has yet reached the extreme of wretchedness. Then who has? Perhaps you'll agree that this next case is even more wretched. Which one? The one who is tyrannical but doesn't live a private life because some misfortune provides him with the opportunity to become an actual tyrant. On the basis of what was said before, I assume that what you say is true. Yes, but in matters of this sort, it isn't enough just to assume these things. One needs to investigate carefully the two men in question by means of argument, for the investigation concerns the most important thing, namely, the good life and the bad one. That's absolutely right. Then consider whether I'm talking sense or not, for I think our investigation will be helped by the following examples. What are they? We should look at all the wealthy private citizens in our cities who have many slaves, for, like a tyrant, they rule over many, although not over so many as he does. That's right. And you know that they're secure and do not fear their slaves. What have they got to be afraid of? Nothing. And do you know why? Yes, it's because the whole city is ready to defend each of its individual citizens. You're right. But what if some god were to lift one of these men, his 50 or more slaves and his wife and children, out of the city and deposit him with his slaves and other property in a deserted place where no free person could come to his assistance? How frightened would he be that he himself and his wife and children would be killed by the slaves? Very frightened indeed. And wouldn't he be compelled to fawn on some of his own slaves, promise them lots of things and free them, even though he didn't want to? And wouldn't he himself have become a panderer to slaves? He'd have to, or else he'd be killed. What if the god were to settle many other neighbors around him who wouldn't tolerate anyone to claim that he was the master of another, and who would inflict the worst punishments on anyone they caught doing it? I suppose that he'd have even worse troubles, since he'd be surrounded by nothing but vigilant enemies. And isn't this the kind of prison in which the tyrant is held, the one whose nature is such as we have described it, filled with fears and erotic love of all kinds? Even though his soul is really greedy for it, he is the only one in the whole city who can travel abroad or see the sights that other free people want to see. Instead, he lives like a woman, mostly confined to his own house, and envying any other citizen who happens to travel abroad and see something worthwhile. That's entirely so. Then, isn't this harvest of evils a measure of the difference between a tyrannical man who is badly governed on the inside, whom you judge to be the most wretched just now, and one who doesn't live a private life, but is compelled by some chance to be a tyrant, who tries to rule others when he can't even control himself? He's just like an exhausted body without any self-control, which, instead of living privately, is compelled to compete and fight with other bodies all its life. That's exactly what he's like, Socrates, and what you say is absolutely true. And so, Glaucon, isn't this a completely wretched condition to be in? And doesn't the reigning tyrant have an even harder life than the one you judge to be the hardest? He certainly does. In truth, then, and whatever some people may think, a real tyrant is really a slave, compelled to engage in the worst kind of fawning, slavery, and pandering to the worst kind of people. He's so far from satisfying his desires in any way that it is clear, if one happens to know that one must study his whole soul, that he is in the greatest need of most things and truly poor. And if indeed his state is like that of the city he rules, then he's full of fear, convulsions, and pains throughout his life. And it is like it, isn't it? Of course it is. And we'll also attribute to the man what we mentioned before, namely that he is inevitably envious, untrustworthy, unjust, friendless, impious, host and nurse to every kind of vice, and that his ruling makes him even more so. And because of all these, he is extremely unfortunate, and goes on to make those near him like himself. No one with any understanding could possibly contradict you. Come then, and like the judge who makes the final decision, tell me who among the five, the king, the timocrat, the oligarch, the democrat, and the tyrant, is first in happiness, who second, and so on in order. That's easy. I rank them in virtue and vice, in happiness and its opposite, in the order of their appearance, as I might judge choruses. Shall we, then, hire a herald, or shall I myself announce that the son of Ariston has given as his verdict that the best, the most just, and the most happy is the most kingly, who rules like a king over himself, and that the worst, the most unjust, and the most wretched is the most tyrannical, who most tyrannizes himself and the city he rules? Let it be so announced. And shall I add to the announcement that it holds whether these things remain hidden from every god and human being or not? Add it. So up next we deal with the just man being the happiest. And so in this book 9, Plato is arguing that the justly king, the philosopher king, is the most happy, and the tyrannical man is the most wretched, because of what we stated earlier in the earlier books, book 4, I think, about all of the virtues of the ideal state. I think it was courage, wisdom, and they're the only two I can remember. So yes, the just man is the happiest is what we come to next. On the basis of the threefold classification of the elements in the human mind made earlier, it is shown that the life of the just man and the philosopher is pleasanter than any other. Good. Then that is one of our proofs, and there'd be a second if you happen to think that there is anything in this. In what? in the fact that the soul of each individual is divided into three parts, in just the way that a city is, for that's the reason I think that there is another proof. What is it? This. It seems to me that there are three pleasures corresponding to the three parts of the soul, one peculiar to each part, and similarly with desires and kinds of rule. What do you mean? The first, we say, is the part with which a person learns, and the second the part with which he gets angry. As for the third, we had no one special name for it, since it's multiform, so we named it after the biggest and strongest thing in it. Hence we called it the appetitive part, because of the intensity of its appetites for food, drink, sex, and all the things associated with them. But we also called it the money-loving part, because such appetites are most easily satisfied by means of money. And rightly so. Then, if we said that its pleasure and love are for profit, wouldn't that best determine its central feature for the purposes of our argument, and ensure that we are clear about what we mean when we speak of this part of the soul? And wouldn't we be right to call it money-loving and profit-loving? That's how it seems to me, at least. What about the spirited part? Don't we say that it is wholly dedicated to the pursuit of control, victory, and high repute? Certainly. Then wouldn't it be appropriate for us to call it victory-loving and honor-loving? It would be most appropriate. Now, it is clear to everyone that the part with which we learn is always wholly straining to know where the truth lies, and that, of the three parts, it cares least for money and reputation. By far the least. Then wouldn't it be appropriate for us to call it learning-loving and philosophical? Of course. And doesn't this part rule in some people's souls, while one of the other parts, whichever it happens to be, rules in other people's? That's right. And isn't that the reason we say that there are three primary kinds of people, philosophic, victory-loving, and profit-loving? That's it precisely. And also three forms of pleasure, one assigned to each of them? Certainly. And do you realize that, if you chose to ask three such people in turn to tell you which of their lives is the most pleasant, each would give the highest praise to his own? Won't a money-maker say that the pleasure of being honoured and that of learning are worthless compared to that of making a profit, if he gets no money from them? He will. What about an honour-lover? Doesn't he think that the pleasure of making money is vulgar, and that the pleasure of learning, except in so far as it brings him honour, is smoke and nonsense? He does. And as for a philosopher, what do you suppose he thinks the other pleasures are worth compared to that of knowing where the truth lies, and always being in some such pleasant condition while learning? Won't he think that they are far behind? And won't he call them really necessary, since he'd have no need for them if they weren't necessary for life? He will. We can be sure of that. Then, since there's a dispute between the different forms of pleasure and between the lives themselves, not about which way of living is finer or more shameful, or better or worse, but about which is more pleasant and less painful, how are we to know which of them is speaking most truly? Don't ask me. Look at it this way. How are we to judge things if we want to judge them well? Isn't it by experience, reason, and argument? Or could anyone have better criteria than these? How could he? Consider then, which of the three men has most experience of the pleasures we mentioned? Does a profit-lover learn what the truth itself is like, or acquire more experience of the pleasure of knowing it than a philosopher does of making a profit? There's a big difference between them. A philosopher has of necessity tasted the other pleasures since childhood, but it isn't necessary for a profit-lover to taste or experience the pleasures of learning the nature of the things that are and how sweet it is. Indeed, even if he were eager to taste it, he couldn't easily do so. Then a philosopher is far superior to a profit-lover in his experience of both their pleasures. He certainly is. And what about an honour-lover? Has he more experience of the pleasure of knowing than a philosopher has of the pleasure of being honoured? No, for honour comes to each of them, provided that he accomplishes his aim. A rich man is honoured by many people, so is a courageous one and a wise one. But the pleasure of studying the things that are cannot be tasted by anyone except a philosopher. Then, as far as experience goes, he is the finest judge of the three, by far. And he alone has gained his experience in the company of reason, of course. Moreover, the instrument one must use to judge isn't the instrument of a profit lover or an honor lover, but a philosopher. What instrument is that? Arguments. For didn't we say that we must judge by means of them? Yes. And argument is a philosopher's instrument most of all. Of course. Now, if wealth and profit were the best means of judging things, the praise and blame of a profit lover would necessarily be truest. That's right. And if honor, victory, and courage were the best means, wouldn't it be the praise and blame of an honor lover? Clearly. But since the best means are experience, reason, and argument, the praise of a wisdom lover and argument lover is necessarily truest. Then, of the three pleasures, the most pleasant is that of the part of the soul with which we learn, and the one in whom that part rules has the most pleasant life. How could it be otherwise? A person with knowledge at least speaks with authority when he praises his own life. To what life and to what pleasure does the judge give second place? Clearly he gives it to those of a warrior and honor lover, since they're closer to his own than those of a money maker. Then the life and pleasure of a profit lover come last, it seems. Of course they do. The philosopher's pleasures are the most real of all pleasures. All others are to some extent mixed with pain and therefore illusory, particularly the pleasure of the tyrant. These then are two proofs in a row, and the just person has defeated the unjust one in both. The third is dedicated in Olympic fashion to Olympian Zeus the Saviour. Observe then that, apart from those of a knowledgeable person, the other pleasures are neither entirely true nor pure, but are like a shadow painting, as I think I've heard some wise persons say. And yet, if this were true, it would be the greatest and most decisive of the overthrows. Hey, Mr. Dragon Slayer, welcome. I hope you're enjoying it. It certainly would, but what exactly do you mean? I'll find out if I ask the question and you answer. Ask then. Tell me, don't we say that pain is the opposite of pleasure? Certainly. And is there such a thing as feeling neither pleasure nor pain? There is. Isn't it intermediate between these two, a sort of calm of the soul by comparison to them? Or don't you think of it that way? I do. And do you recall what sick people say when they're ill? Which saying of theirs do you have in mind? That nothing gives more pleasure than being healthy, but that they hadn't realized that it was most pleasant until they fell ill. I do recall that. And haven't you also heard those who are in great pain say that nothing is more pleasant than the cessation of their suffering? I have. And there are many similar circumstances, I suppose, in which you find people in pain praising not enjoyment, but the absence of pain and relief from it as most pleasant. That may be because at such times a state of calm becomes pleasant enough to content them. And when someone ceases to feel pleasure, this calm will be painful to him. Probably so. Then the calm we described as being intermediate between pleasure and pain will sometimes be both. So it seems. Now, is it possible for that which is neither to become both? Not in my view. Moreover, the coming to be of either the pleasant and the painful, Moreover, the coming to be of either the pleasant or the painful in the soul is a sort of motion, isn't it? Yes. And didn't what is neither painful nor pleasant come to light just now as a calm state, intermediate between them? Yes, it did. Then how can it be right to think that the absence of pain is pleasure, or that the absence of pleasure is pain? There's no way it can be. Then it isn't right. But when the calm is next to the painful, it appears pleasant, and when it is next to the pleasant, it appears painful. However, there is nothing sound in these appearances as far as the truth about pleasure is concerned, only some kind of magic. That's what the argument suggests, at any rate. Take a look at the pleasures that don't come out of pains, so that you won't suppose in their case also that it is the nature of pleasure to be the cessation of pain, or of pain to be the cessation of pleasure. Where am I to look? What pleasures do you mean? And there's, if you're interested in this section on pleasures and pain, in the Phaedo there's also a section where Socrates is saying that pleasure and pain are like Siamese twins that come together. When you have pleasure, pain is never far away, and vice versa, like he's describing here. Where am I to look? What pleasures do you mean? The pleasures of smell are especially good examples to take note of, because they suddenly become very intense without being preceded by pain, and when they cease they leave no pain behind. But there are plenty of other examples as well. That's absolutely true. Then let no one persuade us that pure pleasure is relief from pain, or that pure pain is relief from pleasure. No, let's not. However, most of the so-called pleasures that reach the soul through the body, as well as the most intense ones, are of this form. They are some kind of relief from pain. Yes, they are. And aren't the pleasures and pains of anticipation, which arise from the expectation of future pleasures and pains, also of this form? They are. Do you know what kind of thing they are, and what they most resemble? No, what is it? Do you believe that there is an up, a down, and a middle in nature? I do. And do you think that someone who has brought from down below to the middle would have any other belief than that he was moving upward? And if he stood in the middle and saw where he had come from, would he believe that he was anywhere other than the upper region, since he hadn't seen the one that is truly upper? By God, I don't see how he could think anything else. And if he was brought back, wouldn't he suppose that he was being brought down? And wouldn't he be right? Of course. Then wouldn't all this happen to him because he is inexperienced in what is really and truly up, down, and in the middle? Clearly. Is it any surprise then that if those who are inexperienced in the truth have unsound opinions about lots of other things as well, or that they are so disposed to pleasure, pain, and the intermediate state that, when they descend to the painful, they believe truly and are really in pain, but that when they ascend from the painful to the intermediate state, they firmly believe that they have reached fulfillment and pleasure. They are inexperienced in pleasure, and so are deceived when they compare pain to painlessness, just as they would be if they compared black to grey, without having experienced white. No, by God, I wouldn't be surprised. In fact, I'd be very surprised if it were any other way. Think of it this way. Aren't hunger, thirst, and the like some sort of empty states of the body? They are. And aren't ignorance and lack of sense empty states of the soul? Of course. And wouldn't someone who partakes of nourishment or strengthens his understanding be filled? Certainly. Does the truer filling up fill you with that which is less or that which is more? Clearly, with that which is more. And which kinds partake more of pure being? Kinds of filling up, such as filling up with bread or drink or delicacies or food in general, or the kind of filling up that is with true belief, knowledge, understanding, and in some, with all of virtue? Judge it this way. That which is related to what is always the same, immortal and true, is itself of that kind, and comes to be in something of that kind. This is more, don't you think, than that which is related to what is never the same and mortal, is itself of that kind, and comes to be in something of that kind. That which is related to what is always the same is far more. And does the being of what is always the same participate more in being than in knowledge? Not at all. Or more than in truth? Not that either. And if less in truth, then less in being also? Necessarily. And isn't it generally true that the kinds of filling up that are concerned with the care of the body share less in truth and being than those concerned with the care of the soul? Yes, much less. And don't you think that the same holds of the body in comparison to the soul? Certainly. And isn't that which is more and is filled with things that are more, really more filled than that which is less, and is filled with things that are less? Of course. Therefore, if being filled with what is appropriate to our nature is pleasure, that which is more filled with things that are more enjoys more really and truly a more true pleasure, while that which partakes of things that are less is less truly and surely filled, and partakes of a less trustworthy and less true pleasure. That's absolutely inevitable. Therefore, those who have no experience of reason or virtue, but are always occupied with feasts and the like, are brought down and then back up to the middle, as it seems, and wander in this way throughout their lives, never reaching beyond this to what is truly higher up, never looking up at it or being brought up to it, and so they aren't filled with that which really is and never tastes any stable or pure pleasure. Instead, they always look down at the ground like cattle, and, with their heads bent over the dinner table, they feed, fatten, and fornicate. To outdo others in these things, they kick and butt them with iron horns and hooves, killing each other because their desires are insatiable. For the part that they're trying to fill is like a vessel full of holes, and neither it nor the things they are trying to fill it with are among the things that are. Socrates, you've exactly described the life of the majority of people, just like an oracle. Then isn't it necessary for these people to live with pleasures that are mixed with pains, mere images and shadow paintings of true pleasures? And doesn't the juxtaposition of these pleasures and pains make them appear intense, so that they give rise to mad erotic passions in the foolish, and are fought over in just the way that Stesichorus tells us the phantom of Helen was fought over at True by men ignorant of the truth? Something like that must be what happens. And what about the spirited part? Mustn't similar things happen to someone who satisfies it? Doesn't his love of honor make him envious, and his love of victory make him violent, so that he pursues the satisfaction of his anger and of his desires for honors and victories without calculation or understanding? Such things must happen to him as well. Then can't we confidently assert that those desires of even the money-loving and honor-loving parts that follow knowledge and argument and pursue with their help those pleasures that reason approves will attain the truest pleasures possible for them, because they follow truth and the ones that are most their own, if indeed what is best for each thing is most its own? And indeed it is best. Therefore, when the entire soul follows the philosophic part, and there is no civil war in it, each part of it does its own work exclusively, and is just, and in particular it enjoys its own pleasures, the best and truest pleasures possible for it. Absolutely. But when one of the other parts gains control, it won't be able to secure its own pleasure, and will compel the other parts to pursue an alien and untrue pleasure. That's right. And aren't the parts that are most distant from philosophy and reason the ones most likely to do this sort of compelling? They're much more likely. And isn't whatever is most distant from reason also most distant from law and order? Clearly. And didn't the erotic and tyrannical desires emerge as most distant from these things? By far. And weren't the kingly and orderly ones least distant? Yes. Then I suppose that a tyrant will be most distant from a pleasure that is both true and his own, and that a king will be least distant. Necessarily. So a tyrant will live most unpleasantly, and a king most pleasantly. Necessarily. And now, in this next part, moving on to this next part, Plato compares the tyrant with the philosopher king, and he says that the tyrant is far unhappier than the philosopher king, and he goes on to give his reason. And it's interesting, earlier on, I can't remember which section or part, he says that the philosopher has argument as his tool, And yeah, I don't know if you follow any modern day intellectuals, but that's what they have. These intellectuals, they have their philosophical tools, the argumentation. If you watch podcasts and two people have differing opinions, well, how do we work it out? Which is true or right? I suppose true is the better word. Through argumentation. And if you've read all of Plato's dialogues, you'll see that Socrates was a master of argumentation. And we even have his argumentative method, the Socratic method, named after him. And if you what do they call it? If you dunk on someone or burn someone, then you're using the philosophic method. But anyway, back to the text. The tyrant is happier than the philosopher. Finally, it is shown that the tyrant is 729 times more unhappy than the philosopher king. And so I'm not sure where that comes out or where they've got that number from, but let's see. Back to the text. Do you know how much more unpleasant a tyrant's life is than a king's? I will if you tell me. There are, it seems, 3 pleasures, 1 genuine and 2 illegitimate, and a tyrant is at the extreme end of the illegitimate ones, since he flees both law and reason and lives with a bodyguard of certain slavish pleasures. But it isn't easy, all the same, to say just how inferior he is to a king, except perhaps as follows. A tyrant is somehow third from an oligarch, for a democrat was between them. Yes. Then, if what we said before is true, doesn't he live with an image of pleasure that is third from an oligarch's with respect to truth? He does. Now, an oligarch in turn is third from a king, if we identify a king and an aristocrat. Yes, he's third. So a tyrant is 3 times 3 times removed from true pleasure. Apparently so. So a tyrant is no, it's just 3. So a tyrant is 3 times 3 times. Goodness me. So a tyrant is 3 times 3 times removed from true pleasure. Sorry about that. Apparently so. It seems then, on the basis of the magnitude of its number, that the image of tyrannical pleasure is a plane figure. Exactly. But then it's clear that by squaring and cubing it, we'll discover how far a tyrant's pleasure is from that of a king. It is clear to a mathematician at any rate. Then, turning it the other way round, if someone wants to say how far a king's pleasure is from a tyrant's, he'll find, if he completes the calculation, that a king lives 729 times more pleasantly than a tyrant, and that a tyrant is the same number of times more wretched. So there we have it. It's there. I'll read it again. Then, turning it the other way round, if someone wants to say how far a king's pleasure is from a tyrant's, he'll find, if he completes the calculation, that a king lives 729 times more pleasantly than a tyrant, and that a tyrant is the same number of times more wretched. That's an amazing calculation of the difference between the pleasure and pain of the 2 men, the just and the unjust. Yes, it's a true one, and one appropriate to human lives, if indeed days, nights, months, and years are appropriate to them. And of course they are appropriate. Then, if a good and just person's life is that much more pleasant than the life of a bad and unjust person, won't its grace, fineness, and virtue be incalculably greater? By God, it certainly will. And now we come to the conclusion. Wrongdoing and injustice therefore cannot pay, and goodness brings its own reward. But it is doubtful if the ideal society described, where goodness would have full scope, will ever exist on earth. All right then, since we've reached this point in the argument, let's return to the first things we said, since they are what led us here. I think someone said at some point that injustice... Oh dear, excuse me. I think someone said at some point that injustice profits a completely unjust person who is believed to be just. Isn't that so? So now we're going right back to the beginning in book 1 and 2 when Adamanthus is making these points about the unjust person being more happy. It certainly is. Now let's discuss this with him, since we've agreed on the respective powers that injustice and justice have. How? By fashioning an image of the soul in words, so that the person who says this sort of thing will know what he is saying. What sort of image? One like those creatures that legends tell us used to come into being in ancient times, such as the Chimera, Scylla, Cerberus, or any of the multitude of others in which many different kinds of things are said to have grown together naturally into one. Yes, the legends do tell us of such things. Well then, fashion a single kind of multicolored beast with a ring of many heads that it can grow and change at will, some from gentle, some from savage animals. That works for a clever artist. However, since words are more malleable than wax and the like, consider it done. Then fashion on the other kind that of a lion, and another of a human being, but make the first much the largest, and the other second to it in size. That's easier. The sculpting is done. Now join the three of them into one, so that they somehow grow together naturally. They're joined. Then fashion around them the image of one of them, that of a human being, so that anyone who sees only the outer covering and not what's inside will think it's a single creature, a human being. It's done. Then if someone maintains that injustice profits this human being, and that doing just things brings no advantage, let's tell him that he's simply saying that it is beneficial for him, first, to feed the multiform beast well and make it strong, and also the lion and all that pertains to him. Second, to starve and weaken the human being within, so that he is dragged along wherever either of the other two leads, and third, to leave the parts to bite and kill one another, rather than accustoming them to each other and making them friendly. Yes, that's absolutely what someone who praises injustice is saying. But on the other hand, wouldn't someone who maintains that just things are profitable be saying first that all our words and deeds should ensure that the human being within this human being has the most control? Second, that he should take care of the many-headed beast as a farmer does his animals, feeding and domesticating the gentle heads and preventing the savage ones from growing. And third, that he should make the lion's nature his ally, care for the community of all his parts, and bring them up in such a way that they will be friends with each other and with himself? Yes, that's exactly what someone who praises justice is saying. From every point of view, then, anyone who praises justice speaks truly, and anyone who praises injustice speaks falsely, whether we look at the matter from the point of view of pleasure, good reputation, or advantage. A praiser of justice tells the truth, while one who condemns it has nothing sound to say and condemns without knowing what he is condemning. In my opinion, at least, he knows nothing about it. Then let's persuade him gently, for he isn't wrong of his own will, by asking him these questions. Should we say that this is the original basis for the conventions about what is fine and what is shameful? Fine things are those that subordinate the beast-like parts of our nature to the human, or better perhaps, to the divine. Shameful ones are those that enslave the gentle to the savage. Will he agree or not? He will if he takes my advice. In light of this argument, can it profit anyone to acquire gold unjustly if, by doing so, he enslaves the best part of himself to the most vicious? If he got the gold by enslaving his son or daughter to savage and evil men, it wouldn't profit him, no matter how much gold he got. How then could he fail to be wretched if he pitilessly enslaves the most divine part of himself to the most godless and polluted one, and accepts golden gifts in return for a more terrible destruction than Eriphile's when she took the necklace in return for her husband's soul? A much more terrible one, Glaucon said. I'll answer for him. And don't you think that licentiousness has long been condemned for just these reasons, namely that because of it that terrible, large and multiform beast is let loose more than it should be? Clearly. And aren't stubbornness and irritability condemned because they inharmoniously increase and stretch the lion-like and snake-like part? Certainly. And aren't luxury and softness condemned because the slackening and loosening of this same part produce cowardice in it? Of course. And aren't flattery and slavishness condemned because they subject the spirited part to the mob-like beast, accustoming it from youth on to being insulted for the sake of the money needed to satisfy the beast's insatiable appetites, so that it becomes an ape instead of a lion? They certainly are. Why do you think that the condition of a manual worker is despised? Or is it for any other reason than that, when the best part is naturally weak in someone, it can't rule the beasts within him, but can only serve them and learn to flatter them? Probably so. Therefore, to ensure that someone like that is ruled by something similar to what rules the best person, we say that he ought to be the slave of that best person who has a divine ruler within himself. It isn't to harm the slave that we say he must be ruled, which is what Thrasymachus thought to be true of all subjects, but because it is better for everyone to be ruled by divine reason, preferably within himself and his own, otherwise imposed from without, so that as far as possible all will be alike and friends, governed by the same thing. Yes, that's right. This is clearly the aim of the law, which is the ally of everyone. But it's also our aim in ruling our children. We don't allow them to be free until we establish the constitution in them, just as in a city, and, by fostering their best part with our own, equip them with a guardian and ruler, similar to our own, to take our place. Then and only then we set them free. Clearly so. Then how can we maintain or argue, Glaucon, that injustice, licentiousness, and doing shameful things are profitable to anyone, since, even though he may acquire more money or other sort of power from them, they make him more vicious? There's no way we can. Or that to do injustice without being discovered and having to pay the penalty is profitable? Doesn't the one who remains undiscovered become even more vicious, while the bestial part of the one who is discovered is calmed and tamed and his gentle part freed, so that his entire soul settles into its best nature, acquires moderation, justice, and reason, and attains the more valuable state than that of having a fine, strong, healthy body, since the soul itself is more valuable than the body? That's absolutely certain. Then won't a person of understanding direct all his efforts to attaining that state of his soul? First, he'll value the studies that produce it, and despise the others. Clearly so. Second, won't he entrust the condition and nurture of his body to the irrational pleasure of the beast within, or turn his life in that direction? But neither will he make health his aim, or assign first place to being strong, healthy, and beautiful, unless he happens to acquire moderation as a result. Rather, it's clear that he will always cultivate the harmony of his body for the sake of the consonance in his soul. He certainly will, if indeed he's to be truly trained in music and poetry. Will he also keep order and consonance in his acquisition of money, with that same end in view? Or even though he isn't dazzled by the size of the majority into accepting their idea of blessed happiness, will he increase his wealth without limit, and so have unlimited evils? Not in my view. Rather, he'll look to the constitution within him and guard against disturbing anything in it, either by too much money or too little, and in this way he'll direct both the increase and expenditure of his wealth as far as he can. That's exactly what he'll do. And he'll look to the same thing where honours are concerned. He'll willingly share in and taste those that he believes will make him better, but he'll avoid any public or private honour that might overthrow the established conditions of his soul. If that's his chief concern, he won't be willing to take part in politics. Yes, by the dog, he certainly will, at least in his own kind of city, but he may not be willing to do so in his fatherland. unless some divine good luck chances to be his. I understand. You mean that he'll be willing to take part in the politics of the city we were founding and describing, the one that exists in theory, for I don't think it exists anywhere on earth. But perhaps, I said, there is a model of it in heaven, for anyone who wants to look at it and make himself its citizen on the strength of what he sees. It makes no difference whether it is or ever will be somewhere, for he would take part in the practical affairs of that city and no other. Probably so, he said. And that ends Book 9 of Plato's Republic. And just like in many of the Platonic dialogues, Plato argues or teaches, exhorts us to value the soul more than the body. There's many dialogues. I think the Apology, the Euthyphro, Phaedo, this one, the Republic, that we should be making choices and decisions that benefit the soul and not the body and not the irrational part of the soul. And this is why I think Plato is so popular, especially in the Western world and across the whole world, because it's sort of a secular philosophy. There's no religious aspects. You don't have to believe anything. There's no doctrine. Plato's never saying, oh, this is what it is, this is it, don't question. He's given us the resources and the tools to question everything, to question our own conduct, our own aims and goals in life, and to see if they align with the good and with the good life. And so that's what Plato does for me when I read and consider these things, especially when he speaks about the soul. But yes, everyone, thanks for joining me. That was Book 9, and next week we'll have the concluding Book 10, and I'm very much looking for that. There's a few myths in there, and a part on reincarnation where particular souls are in heaven and they're deciding what they want to come and incarnate as. So very metaphysical, Book 10 of the Republic. So I hope you'll be able to join me for that next week. And if you haven't already, be sure to check out all of the short stories I've uploaded and streamed, I've streamed this week. I've been very busy with the channel with some free time, and I've very much enjoyed sharing them all with you. So catch up on those if you've missed them. But for now, look after yourselves, take care, and I'll see you very soon. Bye guys, see you.